Texas A&M and LSU is the premier matchup in the SEC, Joe. The winner of this game will stand alone in the SEC standings and will remain undefeated. Joe, both teams 6-1. Both teams have a lot of similarities. Both lost their opening game to another Power 4 opponent. Then they've gone undefeated since that point. Both have had rocky roads, right? Not talking about the ice cream. Both have had ups. Both have had downs. But both have been able to find ways to win. Something that was interesting today in listening to Brian Kelly's press conference. He and Mike Elko, also really good friends. Mike Elko was the DC for BK at Notre Dame. So two guys that really know one another. Joe, when you look at this game, how do you see this one playing out?
I think that there's two important factors here that need to be discussed for Texas A&M and LSU. The biggest benefit outside of the momentum that LSU has right now for LSU is that they have the far more experienced coaching staff. And if I were to pick LSU, I haven't made a decision. I was messing with you in the beginning. I haven't made a surefire decision.
Don't get scared now, buddy.
No. I'm just saying now. I have not. I will make my decision on pick day because I think that this is going to be a close one.
I agree.
If LSU wins this game, it's going to be because, and one of the points that we bring up a lot in these previews, in a close matchup, you pick the team with the better coaching staff, the more experienced coaching staff, all the reason to go with LSU. They're playing so much better defensively, as we've talked about. They're getting after the quarterback with such a higher success rate. They're also doing a great job of protecting Garrett Nussmeier. But the other side where we need to put context on Texas A&M, they've been really good for a first-year head coach team. Mike Elko has this team right defensively. They are really freaking good. They're only allowing 30% on third downs. So far this season, you've got a number of guys that are getting after the quarterback. Shamar Turner, Scooby Williams, Nick Scourton have all been super productive. But one thing that stood out to me statistically, and it showed up on film when they played Missouri. This Texas A&M team does not allow many yards after the catch. Mm-hmm. They're a team that plays really sound defensively, and they tackle really well. LSU's success has lived and died on the short to intermediate parts of the field. Garrett Nussmeier, one of his weaknesses, albeit he's got a pretty strong arm, he isn't connected well on deep balls this season. So I think if there's one area where Texas A&M could win this on the defensive side of the football in a close game where LSU needs to connect on a shot, I think that's worth noting that Texas A&M has been having success in that area.
So I'm going to add on to the last part very quickly. Joe, here's the question that I have. Missouri's been very much struggling throwing the football. They have not been able to protect Brady Cook. The question that I have in the keys to victory, I'll give it here on Ruffino and Joe show on Monday. We do it when we talk LSU on Thursdays, what I believe. The big question I have is, has A&M secondary faced a unit that can throw the ball around like this, right? And I get what you're saying, and I agree. They're a very well-coached defensive team. Elko is a fantastic DC, and a fantastic defensive mind. My question becomes is how does LSU attack them? Joe, last week they found an intermediate passing game that went off. C.J. Daniels was the number one wide receiver in the portal for a reason. He also went off 8 big catches after coming back from the injury. But Joe, here's if I'm LSU, the number one thing that they got to do is get out fast. Let me explain. I don't know if LSU could get up a score or maybe even 2 by chance. I don't think A&M can play catch up. Right? They're 107th in the country in passing yards. I know that Connor Wigman had a really good game against Mizzou, but I also think that there was added into there that his receivers went off for him too. Joe, against Miss State, my man came back to earth. Okay, there were some bad passes. He got picked off twice. I think that this is a very close game, but I don't know if LSU's strengths aren't a little bit more than what A&M's strengths would be on for LSU. Like, I expect A&M to stop the run. I expect them to be really good there. Joe, I expect them to wreak some havoc on third down. Look, you got one of the best defensive units, and on third down, 16th is A&M versus one of the best offensive units on third down, that being LSU at 11th. But I just look at this and say, look, LSU's not giving up sacks. they're not giving up many pressures. And I don't know if A&M, because the big teams that they've played, Notre Dame and Missouri, Joe, what has been the two complaints that we've talked about Notre Dame and Missouri? That they have not been effectively throwing the football the way that we thought that they could or would. With that being said, that is the biggest strength for LSU. Now, for A&M, Joe, here's what I would be – if I'm LSU, what I'd be terrified about. If you can't run the football, at some point you're going to get beat, right? You couldn't run the football against Ole Miss. You did have a lot of success now that Caden Durham was back and more healthy than what he was against Ole Miss. Can you do that against A&M? Joe, last year, LSU barely could run the football outside of Jaden Daniels in the game a year ago, and you got a lot of those same core pieces in the middle there with Shamar Turner, Stewart, all those guys, right? And you bring in Nick Scourton. The thing for me, though, Joe, is that I don't think that A&M's D-line has faced an O-line that has been this successful yet. And so that's, again, to those strengths of A&M, LSU, I feel like, can combat that. Last thing I'm going to say before you get to your point here. LSU has not beaten Texas A&M in Kyle Field since 2016, since Ed Orgeron was officially hired. Joe Burrow went in there 7 overtimes and lost. LSU, when they won the West under Brian Kelly 2 years ago, they lost at the end of the year. Joe, I don't care what anybody tells me. And I know that home field advantages have really played big this year for most teams. Look at the upsets. Joe, this place is going to be rocking because they believe, whether you look at A&M fans or not, they truly believe that if they can get past LSU, that their schedule is favorable enough that they can make a playoff run in year one under Mike Elko. So it's been a tough series for LSU going on the road to Kyle Field.
Quickly on that thought, it's kind of like how Alabama always has Georgia's number. No matter if there's some disparity, whatever it is, Kirby can't get past Alabama, and it's something that
which is really ironic because LSU used to dominate this series, Joe. That when they came in the league, they won 10 straight games.
And same thing applies for that example I just gave there. It's only really been recently that we've seen that. So that is certainly something worth noting here. To extrapolate on 2 points that you just made that I think are really great for discussing this on like what is required of both teams to win. Texas A&M's sack production, a lot of it came against what is probably a bottom 4 offensive line in the SEC. They're playing bad. We're going to get to Missouri later. They got their asses kicked with a bunch of 4-man pressure fronts. It didn't require much effort for Texas A&M to get home against Missouri. So they're getting a lot of their sack production there. They didn't have a great game against Notre Dame. Notre Dame's offensive line is good. This was before they got banged up at the start of the season, but it was starting a couple of young players, and they couldn't get home.
Freshman at left tackle, etc.
Right. They couldn't get home. So there's a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde with this defensive line. It's tremendous. It's very, very talented. Nick Scourton starting to like really get into his rhythm, it feels like, after he had a bit of a slow start. This game is going to be won on that part of this, as we talk about a ton. The line of scrimmage is always the easiest thing to lean on in these conversations, especially in the SEC. Will the Texas A&M pass rush overcome an offensive line that has only allowed 2 sacks entirely this season? And then the second part.
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say the second part that you bring up, you're having all these troubles trying to run the football, and you can't do it consistently. You're going up against a team that does run the ball extremely well. Even when they transition from Marcel Reed back to Connor Weigman, Le'Veon Moss popped off against Missouri, which was still a pretty good defense that they were going up against. If they can win the time of possession, if they can keep LSU off the field and they can slow the game down like they felt like they were trying to against Notre Dame and they did against Missouri, that's how they can pull this game out and they can win it. So there's 2 sides of this, of what LSU can do to win because their O-line's so good, and then inversely, as you brought up here, if that Texas A&M run game takes over compared to the LSU one.
Joe, I look at one thing to your point about A&M running the football. I'm glad you brought this up. This is a really good discussion piece.
Yeah.
LSU is 33rd in the country in run defense. Think about that for just a moment. Joe, they gave up 2 65-plus yard runs against South Carolina. They gave up a 75-yard run against Nichols. Joe, I hate using the comparison that I'm bringing up, but I'm trying to get a point of how they've been more in the totality of the game as an example. Joe, if you take one of those plays out, just one, that went for a touchdown, LSU is 11th in run defense. If you take two of them out, post Harold Perkins, Joe, they're second. So I think that there comes a part where we talk about, Joe, what is, we're not talking about LSU's defensive line. It's fine because they've given up big misses in the run game, and they did it early. They did it against Ole Miss early when they're playing freshmen. But I think that here's an interesting thing. I'm going to ask you this, Joe, from a statistical analysis standpoint, even though I don't know if I truly believe what I'm about to say here, from a statistical point, LSU has been better than any defensive line that they faced so far this year, whether it be the run game or in the havoc rate, especially in the last 4 weeks or at least 3 weeks since Harold Perkins went down against UCLA. So, look, I look at this, Joe, and I just say, I'm with you. It worries me as an LSU fan if I were one. I am. But if it would worry me that I think that LSU, to this counterpoint, Joe, the more physical running team that they saw was South Carolina, and South Carolina at moments carved them up, right? And so there are counteractions that I look in this. Now, I'm going to bring up this point. I think in the pass game, LSU has maintained without Harold Perkins rushing the passer. Joe, as they're starting to call him down in the bayou, the honky badger, Whit Weeks, Joe, he's been the SEC Player of the Week the last 2 weeks in the SEC. So
Can I bring up, why do I feel like no one's talking about Braden Swinson, by the way? Like, why do I feel like nationally no one's talking about this? Kid's got 7 sacks, 8 tackles for loss.
And by the way, he had a think about this. He had a strip sack, okay, against Arkansas on Saturday that they labeled as not a sack because Taylon Green caught the ball back in the air.
What?
So he swiped down, okay, the ball gets deflected out and somehow gets bobbled around. Taylon Green catches it, okay? They don't give Swinson the sack. By the way,
so he would have 8
he
sacks. He
rolls
right
out of the pocket and throws the football, which should have been a 15-yard penalty. So Braden Swinson should have 8 sacks. I am on record in saying this. So just throwing it out there.
He's not getting enough love, though. I was perplexed.
He's gone off.
Yeah, he's been.
Can I say something? He's everything that people thought Harold Perkins would be.
Well, he's also, he's
at a
lot
different
bigger.
position. I get that, but
he's a much different build. But right, the production that you're getting out of Swinson is what you were expecting to get out of Harold Perkins.
Correct.
It's a very interesting point.
So,
sorry, I'm just trying to see where he ranks.
He's second. Let me back up. He was second last week because Kennard probably went off this week too.
He's listed 7th. There's Antoine Powell Ryland, who's the Virginia Tech kid.
Yeah,
who had a big game against Miami. He's got 10, so he's up there. And like you said, he's tied with Kennard.
Mm-hmm. So he's second in the SEC, but he has been going off. It's gonna be interesting. And by the way, how is Chase Basantis? I think it's a big question on that one too. Yeah. Joe, last point that I want to make here. Well, I'm gonna leave that alone. I'll wait to say that on Wednesday. But okay. I'm really interested to see if LSU goes up early, if Connor Wigman can answer the call. I'm really interested, Joe.
It's a good point. When he was kind of playing behind in the Notre Dame game, it felt like he was trying just like really hard to rebalance in that situation. But I still think, and this was my whole talking point after he played so well against Missouri, was that I think it was an example of why I think we're too quick to bail on kids when they have 1 or 2 bad games, that there's plenty of room for improvement when you're especially as gifted as he is. I think that he's playing his best football, and when you had a performance like you did a couple weeks ago, all the more reason why he's going to play well. And also, by the way, one thing we didn't mention here, we're hyping up the LSU offensive line. The Texas A&M offensive line's only allowed 7 sacks this year. So they're also a very, very good unit. They don't have the premier first-rounders like LSU does, but they've got a really good group that's just playing really well together.
Yeah. So look, we do this on every prediction. I'm not going to miss it on this one too. We pick our games on Wednesdays. Joe, if this were a neutral site, I'd say flip a coin. I'm still going to say flip a coin. I think it's that's where I'm at. If you came to me, which I see a super chat in there, could maybe be reminded of this. So Fravel Edit says, "Sorry, Blake, I love you, man, but Texas A&M is going to beat LSU." Joe, I can see it. I mean, I can see that happening. He says,
"Well, yeah, Notre Dame fans need Texas A&M, right?"
Only because it fits my pro Notre Dame agenda, and we can say we won a road game against the number one team in the SEC standings. It's just business. Thank you for the super chat, and I understand it. But to the point, could I see it? Yes. But I also, Joe, let me ask you this. Do you know more about the adversity that LSU has overcome or A&M? Because I feel like that from a national perspective, because LSU's played Ole Miss, okay, they played Arkansas, and they played USC as a standalone game, and then you had College Game Day at South Carolina. I mean, I feel like, Texas A&M played Mississippi State and Notre Dame. The last
come on, I wouldn't discredit. I don't know, man. I don't know if I would go that far to say that.
I'm not discrediting them, but you cannot tell me that they have faced a better team than this one. I know Notre Dame.
I think this is the best matchup for both these teams this season.
I agree with that.
By a pretty big margin. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.